All right.
And it's something to say with Tom Probasco. Hi, Tom.
Hello, Frank.
Have you got a poem for us today, Tom?
Yes, I do. So we've called this presentation Something to Say. A long time ago, when I was putting together poems, that title just came to me because I like the fact that it has two meanings. You can say, something about that, that person really had something to say. Or it can be just like, oh, it was just something to say. It has kind of that aspect to it that I liked. And then the subtitle, poem, this is volume one, Poems of This Very Life. I don't know how that occurred to me, but anyway, that's what it became. Uh, so, something to say, Poems of This Very Life. And Frank, you encouraged me early on to do these things. And so well, you said a chapbook, and then I wound up making five initially and added one late last year. So there's six of them. So if people don't like these, it's your fault. Uh, so the the first one in volume one or number one is Even Then. God, how I miss those bright, clear, cool summer mornings with air so fresh and free and full of promise. They stood out even then. And that's all there is to it. But I kind of remember this was a long time ago, and it was a memory of a place I've lived. And there's other poems in this book, these books, uh, and I lived in a grew up in a one-room schoolhouse about a mile east of Xenia, Ohio, and these early poems especially refer to my experiences then. Uh, so that's that one that came to mind when we first started talking about doing this. Um, oh, another one then, just real. So you can find it here if I can. This was another one that refers to that house. Like I said, it was a renovated one-room schoolhouse. An architect did that. I think lived in it a while. Then my parents bought it from him. I want to say this was in the late 50s. No, what? Yeah, maybe that late 50s. I was like 18 months old when we moved there. But let me see here. Oh, here it is. This one, a dream of drawing. Just a dream of drawing a deep, deep breath of air. Moonlight through tall windows, shadows on the walls of a high ceilinged house. Lying on a rollaway bed in the living room with two cousins. It was summertime. Another old memory.
I have memories like that. I suspect most of us do. And our early memories really do stand out. Um,
Yeah,
and, and I like that phrase, even then.
yeah.
Uh, what does that mean to you? How do you?
Well, even that experience, that very simple experience of that cool summer morning, has layers to it in the sense that I was probably, maybe I had a window open wherever I was living when I wrote this, probably in an apartment here in Indianapolis. And that occurred to me, but I was thinking of a time when I was at that house on Hoop Road. So there was, that experience of that cool summer morning, and it seemed extraordinary even then.
Mm, mm,
Um, that it stood out even then.
Tom, I have a memory uh, that I want to share with you. I
Yes.
may have mentioned it before, but uh, I remember I must have been like four, 3, 4, 5 years old back in the very early part of my life, and we lived um, near Mahaleysville,
Oh
uh,
yeah.
and our home was in a one of the hollers, uh,
Yes.
and I remember we were walking along this dirt road to where the little kind of a shack that we lived in, one room, I think, with a coal oil lamp. But it was a beautiful day, and the sides of the hill of that holler rose up uh, uh, beside us, and it was just gorgeous even then. And knowing, I remember knowing that I needed to remember that
Right.
even
Yes.
then.
Even
And
yes.
how does a little child mark something for memory and why?
Right. Yeah.
But even then, I did that, and
Yeah.
that memory is still with me.
And I've heard you uh, talk about that to some degree before, and then always reminds me, and I've said this to you previously. Um, you, as a singer songwriter, have written many songs, and there was one called "The Land." And when you told me of that memory, I thought, that stems, I think, that connection because both of us, you lived holler. I lived in farm country, but I know about hollers because my grandparents had a place in northern Appalachia, and I know about hollers. But
Yes,
both of us, it's a country environment. Now, both of us have lived in towns and cities uh,
mm,
subsequently for many years, but the impact of those places remain. But
yes.
that song you wrote, the land, I always thought it reminds. Whenever you mentioned, when you first told me about that memory, I think I'd already heard the land.
And that song refers to that very place and that memory and others associated with it. The power of place. Uh,
Yeah,
there's a group that um, talks. They do presentations or meetings, and they talk about the power of place. And
yeah,
I think that different places have different powers, different energies.
yeah,
Uh, I the church that I went to on the near east side of Indianapolis is closed, but
hmm,
for those of us who are still living who went there,
yeah,
it is a sacred place. It remains very much in our hearts, and the
yeah,
memories associated with it are sacred.
yeah,
Uh, there, there's a scripture where and Moses is told by God, "Take your shoes off, Moses. You're standing on holy ground."
yeah,
And I think there is. I think that that really happened, and I think it does happen uh, when we find ourselves on a ground that is holy to us. We know it.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting thing that I've talked a lot about the author, uh, poet Wendell Berry.
Yes.
He says um, somewhere that all places are sacred places, but so many have been defiled. They've all places are sacred, but there have been so much disregard to that by so many, um, and so that reminds me of that concept. You're standing on sacred ground, and really, wherever you go, you are, but you wouldn't tell. I think that's something that we lose that in not being rooted to places, um, to consider, what is the song? Rocks and trees, skies and seeds, all elements. We talk about animate and inanimate, and I don't, more all the time, I don't see a distinction. And I don't see human beings at the apex of it. We are one element, one being amongst many. We see what we see, pretty much blind to the rest.
Pretty
But we can
much.
increase, we can seize, we can open our eyes if we recognize that and appreciate the other elements, beings, whether it's rocks, soil, trees, other animals. I see that as, to the degree we can do that, less violence. We aren't going to degrade something that you have affection for. And that's another Wendell Berry concept. It all turns on affection. It's kind of is how I more and more see that all the time. And that's in your song, um, The Land,
Yes.
where you say, and sometimes I cry for no apparent reason. Uh, when you recognize desecration was the word I was trying to find.
Yes.
It's been desecration of a thing that we're part of. It desecrates everything, including the desecrator. Um, so that to the extent that we can recognize that, it's the thing you've said this before too. Others have said it. Peace isn't just the absence of violence. Uh, it's an absent. You cannot be fighting and still, if you don't have affection, it all turns on affection. You can still then the next desecration is just around me. Saying kind of awkwardly, but that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah. Yeah. That the concept of the very concept of sacredness and of the holy uh, has been has been um, desecrated by modernism, uh, and, and and I think that's been an aberration in time. I really believe that there are many people who are relearning to live sacred lives.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah.
and I know that there was um, we've always had some people who held fast, who really had that
Stay
sense.
put.
Uh, I'm you know, and I saw it turning in popular culture back when Carlos Castaneda uh, started his series of books about Don Juan
Oh, yes.
and writing about the shaman uh, and and Don Juan talked of the following the path with heart, and that takes us right straight back to Jesus, who said when he was asked about which of the commandments were important, the most important, he said, to love God above all else and your neighbor as yourself. On this hangs the law and all the prophets. Uh, and that sacred love, that agape love, uh, I have seen physicists uh, videos of physicists talking about something that holds the universe together or makes it happen,
Yeah.
and that is a pervasive thing. It's a thing that's always there, and we can either recognize it and honor it or not.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
I think there's a spirit um, in places, that every place, like you say, is every place is sacred. Like Wendell put it, every place is sacred, uh, and I think it's important to honor where we're at,
Yeah.
and that goes into our whole concept of time, which is which is we need to honor the time and the place.
Yeah. Yeah. There's another kind of reminds me. There's another. It turns out there's an Indiana author, Russell Scott Sanders. It turns out Wendell Berry here, friends, they're probably more than acquaintances. He mentions them. He mentions Mr. Sanders in a book I read recently. But anyway, probably early '90s, I read a book of essays by Sanders, and one of them is called "Staying Put," which is what that's what it reminds me of. Um, we've become so rootless. It became a goal, for some, go to college, move away, go to college, and move away somewhere. It was almost a goal. So what transpires, and it breaks up communities. You find out later when family members are needing help, or you might find out earlier when they become ill and need help, and you're not together to do that. And it wasn't that long ago, but that wasn't the case when I lived on Hoop Road. Both sides of my family lived nearby. And that stayed until some other events started pulling us apart, started sending us. Uh, so there are a lot of factors involved in that. But this would have been, probably starting in the early '60s. And by the time the '70s rolled around, we were cast, here and there. Um, so something you just said made me think of that. I was just looking here. I don't think it's in this. Uh, I'll have to look. I've got one somewhere called some dandelions in Hill Valley. Hill Valley is where I lived for almost 30 years, Julia and I. Um, but I'll fish that one out somewhere when we continue this conversation. But you mentioned time, I do believe this one has, let's see if I can find, well, maybe I can't. Oh, yeah, no, here it is. And when you, and I think we talked about this earlier, Frank, but this one's called Something Imagined. This make, as soon as you said what you said about time, I came to Indiana to work at Camp James Whitcomb Riley and started out working in the kitchen, became a camp counselor. And so that's where I am when this occurs. Something imagined. Sitting on the dock, looking out across the lake at a wooded hill on the other side. I think of the night we camped top of that hill. That was a month ago, but surely it's been only a week or a little more. It is early morning now, and as the sun brightens the sky, the mist moving on the lake begins to rise and pass away, moving like time, like something not real, like something imagined. So when you said that, that's what it reminds me of. That of it is, in fact, in that first one that I finally found.
I think that's brings up some interesting thoughts for me. I, in a sense, our ability to imagine is is important to our ability to be, because if we don't, if we can't really imagine being where we're at, we really are not fully there. Uh, um, it's like
Yeah,
winning the lottery and being afraid to spend $20 on a book you like, because you really can't imagine how much money you've got at
yeah,
your disposal. So you really, I saw something that supposedly Albert Einstein said that imagination is more important than facts. Uh, and I've also seen spiritual teachers who say we co-create our reality.
yeah, yeah,
So our ability to conceptualize, to imagine, is a critical part of our existence.
yeah, yeah. And I was reading a book a while back. Um, well, the topic was racism. How people are, have these racist. I don't know if they're really opinions in some cases, but you grow up looking at others a certain way. So the author of this book was talking about the importance of imagination that you just said. If we imagined a world that way, where people were enslaved, we can imagine things being different if we're willing to consider that you know, wasn't a good way for anybody to live. And maybe we can imagine a different world. I remember at some point, I grew up hearing this. It wasn't the NAACP. It was, I think, maybe the American Negro Fund or something like that. And I remember the phrase, "Mind is a terrible thing to waste."
Mhm.
But I heard it. And at some point, relatively recently in life, I think I've thought, with all that we are facing, we can't afford to not have all of our minds involved in solutions. So again, I'm kind of drifting away, but the idea of imagining,
I think
Possibility.
I think that's a really critical thing. I have I have in the past had real trouble imagining a world of peace.
Yeah.
Um, I have seen too many uh, 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 covetous, greedy, and violent people in my life to find it easy to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Easy it is not.
But of course, part of part of my growth and my ability to imagine has to do with my growing investment in and understanding of Christianity.
Yes.
And uh, I've been attending Union Chapel in Muncie online. Haven't been there in person yet, but
Oh, okay.
uh,
I wondered
currently,
about that. Okay.
currently we're doing a 14-week study on Matthew 5, the chapters uh, 5, 6, and 7. And that's the Sermon on the Mount. And remember that we've all heard that sermon. If you live in a Western culture,
Yeah.
uh, blessed are the poor in spirit, for they shall
Oh,
inherit the earth.
yeah.
That has always been kind of mystifying to me,
Mhm.
but I'm coming to a new understanding of it, and that understanding has to do with our subject at hand, in the sense that uh, why would Jesus say that blessed are the poor in spirit? And I think it's the same reason he said, unless you be as little children, you can't enter the kingdom.
Yeah.
And and there are cautionary words about rich people not being able to enter the kingdom. People who are rich in spirit, who are wealthy, there there are terrible hazards there if you consider what that can do to your ego,
Yeah.
and you become convinced that you're a self-made person.
Yeah.
Oh, really? How did you do that?
Yeah. Like a magic trick. You just, yeah, yeah,
Right,
yeah,
right. And
yeah,
and the I have been with people who considered themselves uh, privileged, that they really could do no wrong. And uh, I was uncomfortable with that.
yeah,
I'm uncomfortable when I see that in myself. And when I look at the world and I see that rightly understood, there's a horrible danger in wealth.
yeah.
Don't lay up riches. Um,
Oh, for yourself. Yeah. Yeah.
for, yeah,
Beautiful song. Yeah.
and um, if we come to understand that culturally, the truth of that in its rightful way, so that that becomes the ideal, so that culturally we see true wealth in humility and in generosity and peacefulness, as opposed to uh, the conquering the conquering uh, uh, warrior stereotype, or,
Yeah.
archetype. if
Yeah.
that, there's a controlling metaphors in how we think of ourselves. And we're about out of time, Tom. So you want to
Yes.
wrap this up?
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll pull together some material for next week and then be prepared to go on. I can read some out of the chat books, something to say, and then I'd like to talk about things that you have written some more, because those are lyrical things. The music's important in what you've written, but a lot of cases you can just look at the text and yet see where how you've thought about things.
Well, Tom, I want to thank you. As it turns out, we both have something to say, and it's been a real pleasure.
Thank you, Frank.
We'll look forward. We'll look
See
forward
you
to
next
next
time.
week. All right.
Yeah, sure.